The bullet tore through the canvas of Beatrice Harrison's covered wagon just as she crossed into Arizona territory in the summer of 1882. And she knew her father's enemies had finally caught up with her, even though he had been dead for 3 months. She did not scream because screaming would do no good out here in the empty spaces between towns where the desert stretched like a golden ocean, and the mountains rose like ancient teeth against the burning sky. Instead, she grabbed the reins tighter and urged the horses forward, her heart hammering against her ribs as another shot rang out behind her. The wagon lurched over the rough ground, and she could hear the contents of her life rattling in the back. The few things she had managed to salvage after her father was killed in that saloon fight back in New Mexico territory. Beatrice was 22 years old and alone in the world, and she had been heading to Superior, Arizona, where she heard there were jobs for women who could cook and clean in the boarding houses that served the silver miners. She had $3 to her name and a secret shame that burned in her chest every time she looked at the wanted posters on the walls of every town she passed through. Posters she could not read because no one had ever taught her how. The horses were tiring, and she knew she could not outrun whoever was chasing her. She had no gun and no knowledge of how to use one even if she did. Her father had been a gambler and a drunk, but he had never been a teacher, and when she asked him once why she could not go to school like other children, he had laughed and said book learning was for people who had time to waste. So Beatrice had learned to cook and clean and mend, to smile when men looked at her in ways that made her skin crawl, to hide when her father came home angry, and to survive. But she had never learned to read or write, and the shame of it followed her like a shadow. Another shot, and this time she felt the wagon shudder as the bullet struck wood. She risked a glance behind her and saw 2 riders coming fast, their faces hidden by bandanas, and she knew this was the end. They would kill her for whatever reason they thought they had, or they would do worse things first, and either way her life would be over before it had really begun. Then she saw him. A lone rider coming from the east, moving fast on a big sorrel horse, and as he got closer, she could see he was tall in the saddle with broad shoulders and a dark hat pulled low over his eyes. He was heading toward her at an angle that would put him between her wagon and the men chasing her, and she did not know if he was friend or foe, but she had no choice except to keep going. The cowboy reached her just as the 2 riders were close enough that she could hear them shouting. He had his gun out and he fired 3 times in quick succession, not at the men but at the ground in front of their horses. The animals reared and the riders had to fight to stay in their saddles, and in that moment of confusion, the cowboy rode up alongside Beatrice's wagon. "Keep going straight," he shouted at her. "There's an outcropping of rocks about a mile ahead. Get behind it and stay down." She did not argue. She whipped the reins and the tired horses found some reserve of strength and kept running. Behind her, she could hear more gunshots, and she prayed this stranger would not die because he had chosen to help her. She did not even know his name. The rocks appeared like a miracle, a tumble of red boulders that looked like they had been dropped by a giant hand. Beatrice drove the wagon behind them and pulled the horses to a stop, then jumped down and pressed herself against the stone, breathing hard. She could still hear shots in the distance, but they were farther away now, and then they stopped altogether. The silence was worse than the noise. She waited, counting her heartbeats, watching the shimmering heat waves rise from the desert floor. The horses stamped and blew, exhausted. She had no water to give them and no water for herself. If the stranger did not come back, she would have to decide whether to wait here or try to make it to Superior on her own. Then she heard hoofbeats and she pressed herself harder against the rock, wishing she could disappear into it. "Miss, it's safe now." They ran off. The voice was deep and calm, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or maybe Oklahoma. Beatrice peeked around the boulder and saw the cowboy dismounting. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair and eyes the color of river stones. He had a strong jaw and a serious face, and when he looked at her, she saw something in his expression that was neither pity nor desire but simple human concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, thank you, you saved my life." Those men had no right chasing a woman like that. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Name's Wade Yates. I work cattle for the Running Creek Ranch about 15 miles south of here." "Beatrice Harrison," she said. Her voice sounded small and she hated that. "I'm heading to Superior. Are we close?" "About another 10 miles northwest." He looked at her wagon, assessing the damage. "You have a bullet hole in your canvas and your wheel rim is cracked. You won't make it far like that." Her heart sank. "I don't have money to fix it." Wade was quiet for a moment, studying her face in a way that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow did not. There was no judgment in his eyes, only thoughtfulness. "Running Creek is closer than Superior," he said finally. "The ranch owner, Mrs. Caldwell. She's always looking for help in the house. Her cook just left to get married. If you can cook, you might be able to work for her in exchange for room and board until you get your wagon fixed and decide what you want to do." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes and she blinked them back fiercely. "I can cook. I can clean too. I can earn my keep. Then let's get you there before those men come back." Wade went to his horse and retrieved a canteen. He offered it to her first and she drank gratefully. Then he gave water to her horses from his hat. It was a small kindness, but it meant everything to her in that moment. They traveled together, Wade riding alongside the limping wagon, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for danger. Beatrice wanted to ask him questions about who he was and why he had helped her, but the heat and the fear had stolen her words. She kept her hands tight on the reins and tried not to think about what might have happened if he had not appeared when he did. The Running Creek Ranch was bigger than she expected, with a sprawling house made of adobe and wood, several barns, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see men working with horses in a corral. As they approached, a woman came out onto the porch, shading her eyes against the sun. Mrs. Caldwell was in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and a face that showed both kindness and strength. She listened while Wade explained the situation, her sharp eyes taking in Beatrice's dusty dress and frightened expression. "You can cook?" Mrs. Caldwell asked. "Yes, madam. My mama taught me before she passed. I can make bread and stew and roasts. I can make pies and biscuits. I can preserve vegetables and salt meat. I can do laundry and mending and cleaning." "And you're willing to work for room and board?" "Yes, madam. I'll work as hard as you need me to." Mrs. Caldwell nodded. "We have 15 ranch hands who need 3 meals a day and plenty of it." "Can you handle that?" "Yes, madam." "Then you can stay in the small room off the kitchen. We'll get your wagon fixed, and if you want to move on after that, you're free to go. If you want to stay, we can discuss wages." "Fair enough." Beatrice felt something loosen in her chest. "More than fair." "Thank you." Wade helped her move her belongings into the small room, which had a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the desert. It was more than she had hoped for. When everything was inside, he paused in the doorway. "Those men who were chasing you," he said quietly. "Do you know why?" Beatrice hesitated. "My father had debts and enemies. I think they thought I knew where he kept his money, but the truth is he never had any. He gambled everything away." Wade nodded. "If they come around here, Mrs. Caldwell won't let them near you, and neither will I." "Why are you helping me?" The question came out before she could stop it. "You don't know me." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something flash in his gray eyes, something that might have been old pain or memory. "Because someone helped me once when I needed it," he said. "And because it's the right thing to do." Then he was gone, and she was alone in her new room, sitting on the bed that smelled of sun-dried cotton, trying to understand how her life had changed so completely in the span of a few hours. That evening she cooked dinner for the ranch hands. A big pot of beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread she made from the supplies in Mrs. Caldwell's well-stocked kitchen. The men ate with the enthusiasm of people who had been living on beans and hardtack, and when Wade came in with the last group, he caught her eye and smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it made her feel warm in a way that had nothing to do with the kitchen fire. Over the following weeks, Beatrice fell into a rhythm at the Running Creek Ranch. She rose before dawn to start breakfast, cooked 3 huge meals a day, kept the kitchen and dining area clean, and fell into bed exhausted every night. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and Mrs. Caldwell was fair and even kind in her gruff way. Wade came by the kitchen often, usually with some excuse about needing water or checking if the hands had been fed. He would linger sometimes, watching her work, and they would talk about small things like the weather or the cattle or the state of the ranch. He never pushed for more information about her past, and she was grateful for that. But there was something growing between them, something she could feel in the way his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking, in the way her heart sped up when she heard his voice, in the small kindnesses he showed her that went beyond simple courtesy. One evening about a month after she arrived, Wade stayed behind after the other hands had left the dining hall. Beatrice was wiping down tables and putting away the last of the dishes. "You settling in all right?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Better than all right. Mrs. Caldwell said I can stay on permanent if I want, with wages starting next month." "That's good. You planning to stay?" She paused in her work and looked at him. "I don't have anywhere else to go, and I like it here." "I'm glad." He pushed off the doorframe and came closer. "Beatrice, there's a dance in Superior next Saturday, just a simple town social at the community hall. I was wondering if you might want to go with me." Her heart did a strange flip in her chest. "Like a courting thing, if that would be all right with you. If not, we can just go as friends." She had never been courted before. Her father had chased away any boy who looked at her twice, and after her mother died when Beatrice was 15, there had been no women to teach her about men and love and how any of that was supposed to work. But she liked Wade Yates. She liked his quiet strength and his gentleness, and the way he treated her like she mattered. "I'd like that," she said, "as a courting thing." His smile transformed his serious face. "Good. I'll borrow Mrs. Caldwell's buggy and pick you up after lunch on Saturday." That night Beatrice lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She was excited and terrified in equal measure. What would they talk about? What if she said something stupid? What if he discovered how ignorant she was? The shame of her secret pressed down on her. She had managed to hide it so far by being careful, by claiming her eyes were tired when Mrs. Caldwell asked her to check a recipe, by memorizing where things were kept so she never had to read labels. But what if Wade found out? Would he still want to court her if he knew she could not even read a menu or write her own name? Saturday came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Beatrice wore her best dress, which was not very fine but was clean and mended. Mrs. Caldwell lent her a shawl and helped pin up her dark blonde hair in a style that looked almost elegant. "He's a good man, that Wade Yates," Mrs. Caldwell said as she worked. "Came here about 4 years ago with nothing but the clothes on his back and a good horse, worked his way up to foreman. Honest and hardworking and kind. You could do a lot worse. I'm just going to a dance, Beatrice protested, but her cheeks were warm. That's how it starts. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes were twinkling. Just how it starts. Wade arrived promptly after lunch, cleaned up and wearing a pressed shirt that made his shoulders look even broader. He helped her into the buggy with a gentleness that made her feel precious, and they set off toward Superior, with the afternoon sun warm on their faces. "You look real pretty," Wade said after they had been riding for a few minutes. "Thank you. You look nice too." They were both nervous, and it showed in the stilted conversation, but gradually, as the miles passed, they relaxed. Wade told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 18 and drifting west looking for work. She told him about her mother's kindness and her father's weakness, about the years of moving from town to town, about finally being alone after her father died. "Do you miss him?" Wade asked. Beatrice thought about it. "I miss having family. I miss feeling like I belong somewhere, but my father was not an easy man to love." "I understand that." They arrived in Superior as the sun was beginning to lower in the sky, painting the buildings gold. The town was bigger than Beatrice had expected, with real streets and shops and a church with a white steeple. The community hall was at the center of town, and people were already arriving for the dance, families and couples and groups of young people laughing together. As Wade helped her down from the buggy, Beatrice saw a board outside the hall with writing on it. She looked away quickly, not wanting Wade to ask her to read whatever it said. But he noticed. "Looks like there will be a pie auction later. Mrs. Henderson always wins with her apple pie." "Oh," Beatrice said, relieved that she did not have to admit anything. Inside the hall, lanterns hung from the rafters and a small band was setting up in the corner. Tables lined the walls holding food and punch, and the center of the floor was clear for dancing. Wade introduced her to several people, and she tried to remember all the names, knowing she could not write them down later to help her memory. When the music started, Wade led her onto the floor. She had never really danced before, and she told him so, expecting him to be disappointed. "That's all right," he said. "Just follow my lead. I'll keep you from tripping." He was patient with her, guiding her through the steps of a simple waltz, and after a few stumbles she started to get the feel of it. Being in his arms felt right in a way she could not explain. She could feel the solid warmth of him, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather, could see the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. They danced several dances, then went to get punch and cool off. A group of women were gathered near the refreshment table, talking and laughing, and one of them called out to Wade, "Wade Yates, you did not tell us you were bringing a sweetheart." Wade did not look embarrassed. "This is Miss Beatrice Harrison. She works up at Running Creek." The women welcomed her warmly, pulling her into their conversation, asking her questions about where she came from and how she liked Arizona territory. Beatrice answered as best she could, feeling grateful for their friendliness, but also anxious that someone would ask her something she could not answer without revealing her secret. Then one of the women, a pretty redhead named Lucy, held up a piece of paper and a pencil. "We're putting together a list of people who want to volunteer for the church picnic next month. Can you write your name down if you want to help?" Beatrice's throat closed. Everyone was looking at her expectantly. Wade was standing right there. She could feel her face burning. She started, but no good excuse came to her mind. Wade smoothly took the paper and pencil. "Here, let me. Beatrice makes the best fried chicken you ever tasted. She should definitely be on the list." He wrote something down and handed the paper back to Lucy, and the moment passed. The women went back to their chatter, and Wade guided Beatrice away toward the door. "Let's get some air," he said quietly. Outside, The evening had cooled and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Beatrice wrapped Mrs. Caldwell's shawl tighter around her shoulders and tried to stop trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" She could not look at him. "You know what?" Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very gently, "You cannot read or write. It was not a question." Beatrice felt tears spill over and she wiped them away angrily. "I'm sorry. I know I should have told you. I know it makes me ignorant and stupid and not fit for someone like you to court. I'll understand if you want to take me back to the ranch and forget this ever happened." "Hey." Wade took her shoulders carefully, turning her to face him. "Look at me, Beatrice." She forced herself to meet his eyes, expecting to see disgust or pity. Instead, she saw only compassion. "You are not ignorant and you are certainly not stupid," he said firmly. "You can cook and manage a kitchen and do the work of 3 people. You survived losing your parents and being alone and being chased by dangerous men. You have more courage than most people I know. Not knowing how to read and write does not change any of that." "But I should know," she said, her voice breaking. "Everyone else knows, children know, and I'm so ashamed." Wade pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her, and she leaned into his chest and let herself cry. He did not try to stop her or tell her it was all right. He just held her while she let out all the fear and shame and loneliness she had been carrying for so long. When she finally quieted, he said, "Would you want to learn? If someone was willing to teach you?" She pulled back to look at him. "Do you know how? I can read and write well enough. My mother taught me before she died. I could teach you if you want." "Why would you do that?" He reached up and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Because I care about you, Beatrice Harrison. Because I think you're brave and beautiful and worth every bit of effort it would take. And because I want you to have every opportunity in this world that you should have had all along." She stared at him, unable to speak. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever made her feel like she was worth something. "I can't pay you," she managed. Wade smiled. "I don't want payment, I just want to help you if you're willing." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, please, I want to learn." They went back inside and danced some more, but everything had changed. The fear and shame that had been weighing on Beatrice had lifted, replaced by something bright and hopeful. She had told someone her darkest secret, and he had not turned away. Instead, he had offered to help her. Maybe, she thought as Wade spun her around the dance floor, maybe she could have a real life here. Maybe she could learn and grow and become someone she could be proud of. Maybe she could even fall in love on the ride back to the ranch they talked about when they could start the lessons. Wade suggested early mornings before breakfast, or evenings after the hands had eaten. Beatrice said mornings would be better because she was too tired in the evenings to think clearly. "We'll start tomorrow then," Wade said. "I'll come by the kitchen at dawn with some supplies." When they reached Running Creek, he walked her to the kitchen door. The ranch was quiet, most of the hands already asleep in the bunkhouse. The moon was up now, full and bright, turning everything silver. "Thank you for today," Beatrice said. "For the dance, for understanding. For offering to teach me, for everything. It was my pleasure." Wade hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. "Sleep well, Beatrice." She went to bed that night with her fingers pressed to the spot where his lips had touched her skin, her heart full of feelings she did not have names for yet. Wade arrived the next morning just as the sky was turning pink, carrying a slate board, chalk, and a worn primer book. Beatrice had already started the coffee and the kitchen was warm from the stove. "We'll start simple," Wade said, setting up at the kitchen table. "The alphabet first, then basic words." He wrote out the letters carefully, showing her the shapes, telling her the sounds they made. Beatrice watched his hands move across the slate, fascinated by how confident he was, how easily the letters flowed from his chalk. "Now you try," he said, handing her the chalk. Her first attempts were shaky and uneven, the letters looking like broken sticks. But Wade was patient, guiding her hand, showing her where to press harder or softer. By the time she needed to start breakfast, she could write 5 letters on her own. "You're doing real good," Wade said as he gathered up his supplies. "We'll do more tomorrow." They fell into a pattern over the following weeks. Every morning before dawn, Wade would come to the kitchen, and they would spend an hour working on letters and sounds and simple words. Beatrice was frustrated by how slowly she learned, but Wade never showed any impatience. He would just smile and say, "You're doing fine. Learning takes time." She began to recognize some words when she saw them around the ranch. She could read flour on the sack in the pantry and sugar on the jar. She could write her own name, first in awkward block letters and then with increasing confidence. Every small victory felt like a miracle, but it was not just the reading and writing that made those early morning hours precious. It was the time alone with Wade, the quiet intimacy of sitting close together as he explained something or she practiced a word. It was the way he looked at her when she got something right, with pride and pleasure lighting up his face. It was the accidental touches, his hand over hers guiding the chalk, their shoulders brushing as they bent over the slate. She was falling in love with him and she knew it. The knowledge should have frightened her, but instead it felt like coming home. One morning about 2 months after their first lesson, Wade was teaching her to write short sentences. She was concentrating hard, her tongue caught between her teeth as she carefully formed the words "I can read." "Perfect," Wade said when she finished. "You can too. You're reading at about a 3rd grade level now." Beatrice looked up at him and saw the warmth in his eyes, and suddenly she could not hold back anymore. "Teach me to love like you," she whispered. Wade went still. "What? Teach me to love like you do," she said, her heart pounding. "You love with your whole heart. You help people without asking for anything back. You're patient and kind and good. I've never known love like that. My parents did not show me. No one ever did. But you make me want to learn. You make me want to be better." Wade set down the chalk very carefully. Then he reached across the table and took both of her hands in his. "Beatrice," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You already know how to love like that. You do it every day. The way you take care of everyone here, cooking meals and making sure everyone is fed. The way you work yourself to exhaustion to earn your place. The way you're fighting so hard to learn to read and write even though it scares you. That's all love. Love for yourself, for your future, for the people around you." "But I want to love you," she said, the words tumbling out. "I'm in love with you, Wade Yates, and I don't know how to tell you or show you because no one ever taught me how." His face broke into a smile so bright it was like the sun coming up. "You just did tell me, and I'm in love with you too. Have been since the day I saw you fighting to keep that wagon moving, refusing to give up even when you were scared. You're the strongest, bravest woman I've ever met." He stood and came around the table, pulling her up into his arms. Then he kissed her, really kissed her, and Beatrice felt her whole world shift. His lips were warm and gentle, and she kissed him back with all the feeling that had been building in her heart for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's fast and I know you might want more time, but I'm sure about this. I'm sure about you. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life showing you what love looks like." Beatrice felt tears on her cheeks again, but these were happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They would have kissed again, but the sound of boots on the porch reminded them that the ranch hands would be coming for breakfast soon. They pulled apart reluctantly, and Beatrice went to the stove, her heart singing. Wade told Mrs. Caldwell that day, and the older woman clapped her hands together in delight. "I knew it. Did not I say that's how it starts?" They were married 4 weeks later in the church in Superior, with Mrs. Caldwell and all the ranch hands in attendance. Lucy and the other women from the dance helped Beatrice make a simple white dress, and Mrs. Caldwell gave her a silver comb that had belonged to her own mother to wear in her hair. Walking down the aisle of that little church, seeing Wade waiting for her at the front with his eyes full of love and promise, Beatrice felt like her real life was finally beginning. The preacher spoke words about love and commitment and faith, and when it was time for the vows, Wade took her hands and spoke clearly. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner and your friend. I promise to help you reach for every dream you have." Beatrice's voice shook, but she got the words out. "I promise to love you with everything I am. I promise to stand by you in good times and bad. I promise to build a life with you that would make us both proud." When the preacher said Wade could kiss his bride, the whole church erupted in cheers and applause. Mrs. Caldwell had offered them the use of a small cabin on the ranch property that had been sitting empty. It was just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but Wade and some of the other hands had spent the past few weeks fixing it up, mending the roof and floor, whitewashing the walls, building new furniture. When Wade carried Beatrice over the threshold that evening, she gasped. The main room was simple but cozy, with a real bed covered in a quilt, a table and chairs, a stove, and even some books on a shelf that Wade had built into the wall. "For your reading practice," he said, watching her face. "They're all books I loved. I want to share them with you." That night, after they had made love for the first time in their marriage bed, tender and passionate and a little awkward but full of joy, Wade lit a lamp and pulled out one of the books from the shelf. "Would you like to try reading together?" he asked. So Beatrice curled up against her husband's side and slowly, haltingly, read the first page of a book about a girl who lived on a farm. She stumbled over some of the words and Wade helped her sound them out, his voice patient and encouraging. When she finished the page, she felt like she had climbed a mountain. "I read a whole page," she whispered in wonder. "You did, and tomorrow you'll read another one." Over the following months and years, their life together developed its own rhythm. Beatrice continued to work as the cook at Running Creek, though Mrs. Caldwell insisted on paying her proper wages now. Wade worked his way up to ranch foreman, and then to manager, when Mrs. Caldwell decided to step back from the day-to-day operations. Every morning they still woke up early and Beatrice would practice her reading and writing while Wade drank coffee and got ready for the day. She progressed from simple books to more complex ones, from basic sentences to letters she could write to the women friends she had made in Superior. Writing her own name stopped feeling like magic and started feeling natural. But she never forgot what it had been like to be unable to read or write, to carry that shame and fear. So when a young Mexican girl came to work in the kitchen about a year after Beatrice and Wade were married, and Beatrice noticed the girl could not read the recipe cards, she pulled her aside. "I can teach you if you want," Beatrice said gently. "I learned late too. There's no shame in it." The girl, whose name was Rosa, looked at her with tears in her eyes. "You would do that, of course. That's what we do, we help each other." So Beatrice taught Rosa the same way Wade had taught her, with patience and encouragement and no judgment. And Rosa taught Beatrice Spanish words and phrases, and they would laugh together over the kitchen table, building a friendship that lasted for years. 2 years after they were married, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She told Wade one morning over their coffee and reading lesson, the words coming out in a rush. "I'm going to have a baby. Our baby." Wade's face went through several emotions very quickly: shock, joy, fear, wonder. Then he was pulling her into his arms and spinning her around the cabin. "We're having a baby," he said, and his voice was choked with happiness. "Beatrice, we're going to be parents." Their son was born in the spring of 1885, a healthy boy with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him William, and Beatrice fell in love all over again with the weight of him in her arms, the perfect tiny fingers, the way he looked at her like she was his whole world. Wade was besotted. He would come home from working the ranch and scoop William up, talking to him about cattle and horses and the wide blue sky. At night, he would read to their son from the books on the shelf, the same books Beatrice had learned to read with, and she would watch them together and feel her heart so full she thought it might burst. When William was 2 years old, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time it was a girl, born in the winter with blonde hair and her mother's smile. They named her Margaret, after Wade's mother. As their children grew, Beatrice made sure they learned to read and write as early as possible. She read to them every night and helped them sound out words and praised every bit of progress. She never wanted them to feel the shame and limitation she had felt for so much of her life. "Why is reading so important to you, Mama?" William asked one day when he was about 6. Beatrice thought about how to answer. "Because knowing how to read and write opens up the whole world. You can learn anything you want. You can talk to people far away through letters. You can read stories and go on adventures without leaving home. It's a gift, and I want to make sure you have it." Wade, who was sitting nearby mending a bridle, caught her eye and smiled. She smiled back, thinking about how far she had come from that frightened woman in a bullet-riddled wagon. The years passed with the kind of gentle happiness that Beatrice had never imagined possible. There were hard times too, droughts that killed cattle and winters that were brutal, illnesses that scared them and injuries that came with ranch work. But they faced everything together, she and Wade, partners in every sense of the word. Mrs. Caldwell grew older and eventually passed away peacefully in her sleep when she was 76. She left the Running Creek Ranch to Wade and Beatrice in her will, saying they had been like family to her, and she knew they would take good care of it. "I never thought I'd own land," Wade said the day they met with the lawyer, staring at the deed with their names on it. "I never thought I'd have a family," Beatrice said, "or be able to read, or be this happy." They stood together on the porch of what was now their ranch house, watching their children play in the yard, the cattle grazing in the distance, the Arizona sun setting in a blaze of gold and crimson. "You remember that day when I asked you to teach me to love like you?" Beatrice asked softly. "I remember everything about you," Wade said. "I understand it now. Love is not something you learn from a book or a lesson. It's something you do every day. It's choosing each other every morning. It's being patient when things are hard. It's helping each other grow. It's building a life together that's bigger than what either of you could build alone." Wade put his arm around her and pulled her close. "You taught me just as much about love as I taught you, you know. How? You taught me that love is brave. That it's showing up every day even when you're scared. That it's being vulnerable enough to admit when you need help. That it's fighting for a better future even when the past has been hard. You're the strongest person I know, Beatrice Yates." She leaned into him, watching the sun sink lower. "We should go in soon. The children will need supper. In a minute. Let's just stay here a minute longer." So they stood together on the porch of their ranch house, two people who had found each other when they both needed saving, watching the day fade into twilight. William grew up to be a rancher like his father, eventually marrying a schoolteacher from Superior, and building his own house on the northern edge of the Running Creek property. Margaret became a teacher herself, determined to help children learn to read and write so they would never struggle the way her mother had. when Beatrice was in her 40s, she did something she had been thinking about for years. She started a small school on the ranch for children and adults who had never learned to read. She taught them the way Wade had taught her, with patience and kindness, and no shame. "You're changing lives," Wade told her one evening as they sat together on their porch, now both in their 40s, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. "I'm just passing on what you gave me," she said. "No," he said firmly. "You're passing on what you earned. I gave you the tools, but you did the hard work. You're the one who practiced every morning even when you were tired. You're the one who pushed through the frustration. You're the one who refused to let shame stop you. That was all you, Beatrice." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "We did it together. That's how the best things happen." They had grandchildren eventually, William's children who ran through the ranch house just like their father had. Margaret had 2 daughters who loved books as much as their mother did. Beatrice read to all of them, these children who would never know what it was like to be unable to read, who would grow up with every opportunity she had fought for. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Wade gave Beatrice a leather-bound journal and a fine pen. "For writing down your story," he said. "I think it's worth remembering." So Beatrice, who had once believed she would never be able to write her own name, began to write. She wrote about her childhood and her father's weakness, about being chased across the desert, about a cowboy who saved her life, and then saved her in a deeper way by teaching her to read. She wrote about falling in love and building a life and the slow, patient work of becoming who she was meant to be. It took her 2 years to finish, writing a little bit each night after the day's work was done. When she was finished, she showed it to Wade. He read it in one sitting, and when he looked up there were tears in his eyes. "This is beautiful," he said. "You should let others read it. There are probably a lot of people out there who feel like you did, who think they're too old or too ignorant to learn. Your story could give them hope." "I don't know," Beatrice said, suddenly shy. "Think about it. You don't have to decide now." Eventually, she did let Margaret make copies, and her daughter shared them with other teachers and they passed them around. Beatrice received letters from people all over Arizona Territory and beyond, people who said her story had inspired them to learn to read or to teach someone else or to not give up on their dreams. "Look at you," Wade said, watching her read one of these letters. "Published author." Beatrice laughed. "Hardly that, but I'm glad if it helps someone." They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines from years of squinting into the sun and laughing together. Wade's hands became weathered from a lifetime of ranch work, but they were still gentle when they touched her. Beatrice's hands were scarred from cooking burns and garden work, but they could still form letters as neatly as any schoolteacher. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Half the town of Superior came, along with all the ranch hands who had worked at Running Creek over the years, along with dozens of people Beatrice had taught to read in her small school. Speech. Someone called out and others took up the chant. Wade stood and pulled Beatrice up beside him. All right. You want a speech? I'll give you a speech." He looked around at all the faces, friends and family and people whose lives had intersected with theirs in meaningful ways. 30 years ago, I met a woman who was running for her life. She was scared and alone and she had every reason to give up. But she did not. She kept fighting. She built a life here. She learned to read and write. She raised 2 incredible children. She taught hundreds of people that it's never too late to learn something new. She made this ranch into a real home. He turned to Beatrice and his eyes were soft. "You asked me once to teach you to love like I do, but the truth is, you taught me what love really means. Love means showing up every day. It means being brave enough to be vulnerable. It means never giving up on yourself or the people you care about. You've been teaching me about love for 30 years and I'm still learning. I love you, Beatrice Yates. I thank God every day that I was riding across that desert at just the right moment to find you. Beatrice was crying now, and half the people at the party were too. She reached up and cupped Wade's face in her hands. I love you too, she said. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved, and then you taught me how to save myself. They kissed while everyone cheered. These two people who had found each other when they both needed finding, who had built something lasting and good. The years continued their steady march. Wade and Beatrice eventually handed over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch to William, though they still lived on the property in their cabin that had been expanded and improved over the years. Beatrice kept teaching her reading classes until she was in her 60s, finally stopping only when her eyes started to fail. I can read to you, Wade said when she complained about not being able to see the words as clearly. So he did, every evening, the way she had done for their children years before. They celebrated their 40th anniversary, then their 45th. They watched their grandchildren grow up, and some of them get married and have children of their own. Great-grandchildren who climbed on Wade's lap and called Beatrice Great-Grandma B in high, sweet voices. Can you believe this is our life? Beatrice asked Wade one evening as they sat on their porch, both of them now in their 70s, but still sitting close together the way they always had. I can, Wade said, because we built it together. Every day, every choice, every moment, this is what happens when two people really commit to loving each other. I'm glad it was you, she said softly. I'm glad you were the one who found me that day. It was always going to be me, Wade said. I think God or fate, or whatever you want to call it, put me on that particular stretch of desert at that particular moment because you and I were meant to find each other. Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. I don't want to think about losing you. Then don't. Let's just be grateful for every day we have together. Wade passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks after their 50th wedding anniversary. He was 76 years old and had lived a good, full life. Beatrice woke up that morning to find him still beside her, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers even in death. She sat with him for a long time, this man who had been her husband, her teacher, her best friend, her whole heart for half a century. She told him she loved him one more time, even though he could not hear her. Then she called for her children. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over Arizona to pay their respects. Wade Yates had been known as an honest rancher and a good man, someone who helped his neighbors and treated everyone fairly. The church in Superior could not hold all the people who wanted to attend. After he was buried in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, Beatrice went back to their cabin alone. For the first time in 50 years, she was truly by herself. The grief was immense, like a physical weight pressing on her chest. But underneath the grief was gratitude. She had been loved well for 50 years. She had been seen and valued and cherished. Not everyone got that. Not everyone was so lucky. She opened the journal she had written all those years ago, the story of how they had met and fallen in love and built a life together. Wade had kept it safe all these years, preserving it carefully. Now Beatrice picked up her pen, her hand shaking a little with age but still able to form letters, and she began to write the ending. Wade Yates was the best man I ever knew, she wrote. He taught me to read and write. He taught me that I was worth loving. He taught me that it's never too late to learn or grow or change. He taught me what it means to commit to someone with your whole heart. He gave me 50 years of love and partnership and joy. And even though he is gone now and my heart is broken, I am grateful for every single day we had together. He asked me once to marry him and said he would spend the rest of his life showing me what love looks like. He kept that promise. And I will carry that love with me until the day I die and we are together again. Beatrice lived for 6 more years after Wade passed. She moved into the main ranch house with William and his wife because her children worried about her being alone. She spent her days reading to her great-grandchildren and working in the garden, and sometimes writing letters to the people she had taught over the years. Margaret had taken over the reading school and expanded it, teaching not just reading and writing but mathematics and history and science. She dedicated the school to her parents, hanging a sign above the door that read, "The Yates School for Learning." Beatrice attended the dedication ceremony and cried happy tears. "Your father would be so proud," she told Margaret. "He'd be proud of you too, Mama, for everything you've done." On a warm spring day in 1913, Beatrice Harrison Yates passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 73 years old. Her children found her in her bed with a book lying open on her chest, one of the books Wade had given her when they first married, and a smile on her face. They buried her next to Wade on the hill overlooking the ranch, and the whole town of Superior came to the funeral just as they had for Wade. The preacher spoke about a life well lived, about a woman who had overcome obstacles and helped others do the same, about a love story that had endured through 50 years and beyond. After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch house. William stood up and cleared his throat. "I want to read something," he said. "It's from Mama's journal, the last thing she wrote." He opened the leather-bound book to the final page and read aloud. "I was lost when Wade Yates found me. I could not read or write. I had no family and no home. I was running from danger and running toward nothing. But Wade saw something in me that I could not see in myself. He saw strength and courage and potential. He taught me to read and write, yes, but more than that, he taught me that I was worth the effort. He taught me that it's never too late to learn or change or become who you're meant to be. And when I asked him to teach me to love the way he did, he showed me that love is not a lesson you learn but a life you live. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is showing up every single day and choosing the person you committed to. Love is building something together that's bigger than either of you alone. I have been so blessed to know that kind of love. And I hope that everyone who reads this story will believe that they too can find it, no matter where they're starting from. It's never too late. You're never too lost. There is always hope for a better tomorrow if you're willing to fight for it." William closed the book, and there was not a dry eye in the room. The Running Creek Ranch continued under William's management and eventually passed to his children. The Yates School for Learning grew and became a permanent institution in Superior, teaching generations of children and adults. Margaret wrote a book about her parents' love story that was published and read by thousands of people. And on the hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side. Wade Yates, beloved husband and father. Beatrice Harrison Yates, beloved wife and mother. Between them was carved a simple phrase that summed up everything they had been to each other. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love endures. Their great-great-grandchildren still visit those graves sometimes, bringing flowers and telling stories they have heard about the cowboy who saved a woman in the desert and taught her to read, and the woman who was brave enough to ask him to teach her about love. The stories have become legend in the family, passed down through the generations, a reminder that it's never too late to learn, to grow, to change, to find love. The old cabin where Wade and Beatrice first lived is preserved as a historical site on the ranch property. Inside, the original table where they had their early morning reading lessons still stands, and on the shelf are the books Wade gave Beatrice all those years ago. Visitors can see where two people built a life together, one letter and one word and one day at a time, until they had created something that would last long after they were gone. Because that's what real love does. It builds. It endures. It teaches. It transforms. It leaves the world better than it found it. Wade and Beatrice Yates understood that, and they lived it every single day of their 50 years together, and all the years after when Beatrice kept his memory alive. Their story started with fear and danger and shame, with a woman who could not read and a cowboy who chose to help her. But it became something beautiful. It became a testament to the power of patience and kindness and commitment. It became proof that two people who choose each other every day can weather any storm and build something lasting. And on summer evenings, when the Arizona sun sets over the Running Creek Ranch painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, if you stand very still and listen, some say you can almost hear two voices, one deep and one soft, reading together from the books they loved. It's just the wind, of course, moving through the old cabin. But it's nice to think that somehow, somewhere, Wade and Beatrice are still together, still learning, still loving, still showing anyone who will listen what it means to commit to someone with your whole heart. Their love story began in 1882 in the dust and danger of the Arizona desert. It continues still in the hearts of everyone who hears it and believes that love, real love, the kind that sees past shame and fear to the person underneath, is always worth fighting for, always worth learning, always worth teaching, because in the end, that's what Wade told Beatrice and what Beatrice learned to be true. Love is not something you're born knowing. It's something you practice every day. It's patient lessons at a kitchen table. It's choosing to help when you could walk away. It's believing in someone's potential when they can't see it themselves. It's building a life together, word by word, day by day, year by year, until you've created something that will outlast you both. That's the legacy Wade and Beatrice Yates left behind. Not just a successful ranch or a school or even their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but the knowledge that it's never too late. You're never too lost. There is always someone who will see your worth if you're brave enough to let them. There is always the possibility of learning and growing and becoming more than you thought you could be. There is always love if you're willing to practice it with your whole heart, and that is a lesson worth learning, a story worth telling, a love worth remembering.